coming today. I just want to say, so I'm at Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University right now. Previously, I was at a small environmental liberal arts college, and they were very focused on outdoor education, outdoor recreation stuff. So a lot of what's in here, thinking about taking Leave No Trace and expanding it to Mars, is definitely inspired by a bunch of the conversations I had with colleagues and students there. It was really, really excellent being able to engage with them. So here's the plan. I'm going to give just a brief introduction to sort of the motivations here. Talk about planetary parks. Many of you are maybe already familiar with them, but if you aren't, I'll give you a good, quick and dirty history of it. I'll then go and talk about some of the critiques that they face. I'll give you a background and critique on Leave No Trace, and then smash the two together and conclude. So that's the sort of schedule we've got. So first, the introduction. So why have planetary parks in the first place? Well, given that there is this interest in Martian exploration, going out there, maybe setting up settlements and whatnot, there are people who think Mars matters, think Mars is really cool, think Mars is worth protecting, not just completely terraforming and destroying the character of Mars that makes Mars Mars, right? We want to see Olympus Mons retained and not strip mined or something like that. And so there's this idea that we can go to Mars and get some protected areas. We can try and export a model of environmental protection that has worked at least to some extent on Earth. We can export that to Mars, right? And hopefully, by setting up some of these preserves in the first place, we can avoid their exploitation ahead of time. Right? A lot of the environmental movement on Earth has been in response to, like, oh no, we're already messing up everything. Now we need to start protecting. We're in a unique position when it comes to a place like Mars to protect it ahead of time. So this is a proposal that tries to latch onto this particular opportunity, that we are in a pre-settlement phase for Mars, and so we can implement more protection now, because we're not quite there yet. So background and critique here. So Cockell and Horneck had the planetary park system for Mars that they proposed in 2004. They proposed 7 parks for Mars. We've got this handy-dandy little map here, and then there is also this other park here that protects Chasma Borealis. When I did email Charles Cockell to ask how he drew the borders for these objects, and it seemed like it was just sort of Photoshop. There wasn't like much sort of reason behind exactly why things look the shape that they do, which was a little disappointing. I was hoping there would be a little more to that, but that's fine. It's a good start, right? And here we do get some regulation, right? When we have these parks, the question is then, okay, what are we doing? What sort of protection are we actually giving them? And Cockell and Horneck provide us with a sort of brief list here. So no spacecraft or vehicle parts to be left within the park, no landing of unmanned spacecraft within the park, no waste to be left within the park, access only on foot or surface vehicle along predefined routes, or landing by rocket vehicle in predefined landing areas, all suits, vehicles, and other machines used in the park to be sterilized on their external surfaces to prevent microbial shedding. So we still have this sort of concern about contamination, right? We want to make sure that as far as our astrobiology is concerned, we sort of retain a sort of pristineness here. We don't want to contaminate the sample, as it were. They go on to also give a little bit more in a 2006 paper where they start talking about wilderness. I'll mention something brief on that in a moment. 20 years after this paper was published, Charles Cockell has a follow-up piece, which I'll also talk about, but frustratingly, the same year his 20 years later piece came out, so did mine. So I didn't have the opportunity to actually incorporate that, but I took the proposal and expanded on it, right? Along with, as an environmental philosopher, a deeper sort of discussion of wilderness and what wilderness is. So this is the proposal for my 2024 paper. I've expanded on the number of parks and expanded some of the boundaries. It's still a little rough. The circles need some refinement, as do the rectangles. Part of what I did in this paper was try to give non-arbitrary boundaries. Right? I'm working on them with GIS scientists at the moment. The idea being that if we're trying to preserve, say, particular areas for the value of wilderness experience, right? Going out and hiking through Valles Marineris like you would hiking in Grand Canyon, right? Trying to preserve the sort of majesty of these places. One of the things that we're going to be limited to if we're on Mars is our senses. You need a spacesuit, right? If you can smell Mars, something is going terribly wrong, right? But you can see Mars. So I thought, fine, let's think about preserving the visual character of some of these places, and we can try and use GIS tools in order to create essentially a viewshed analysis where we can put a little fake person on Mars after we fix the software to account for Mars being smaller, so on and so forth, and figure out where you could see from any particular location on Mars. And from this, we can try and draw actually more concrete boundaries than I've got here, again, working on it. That will give us some actual park boundaries that you might be able to even transform into legislation, policy, some sort of proposal that has something concrete to it. I do have some gripes with the way Cockell and Hornick as well in the 2006 piece has sort of set up this planetary park proposal. There is this want to preserve certain bits of Mars. But one of the worries here, and this is a worry that pops up in a lot of environmental philosophy on park systems, is that we're sort of dualizing land. There's the land worth protecting, everything else is fair game. Now, we don't need to take that sort of approach. We can have certain sort of degrees of protection, or say certain protection is warranted in these particular regions for these particular reasons. Right? We can have a more nuanced sort of picture than this. We don't need to dualize land. But that seems to be exactly what Cockell is doing here, right? He winds up arguing that we should take our non-park land and leave it as Lockean land. Land that if you can get there and develop it, it's yours, right? So we have a private property regime that's extending to Mars in an exploitative sort of way, right? He leans into sort of dualism that has been widely sort of critiqued with concepts of wilderness and the park sort of system generally. So with this, he does also recommend that we could either change the Outer Space Treaty in order to allow for more claiming of territory, or we could just reinterpret it, where the Outer Space Treaty just happens to, we agree, really affect certain areas and enact it in that way. Again, leaving it open to development, privatization, claiming of land as property, so on and so forth. I'm not a fan of that. But wilderness, again, has this sort of history here. It comes in, like when we're talking about parks, we're talking about wilderness preserves and preservation. Wilderness is a sort of central idea here. And we do have, in 2006, as I mentioned earlier, Cockell and Hornick framed the parks as in line with some historical arguments. There's this piece by Nelson that lists, I think, 28, 29 different wilderness arguments. And people wind up going with them. So they looked at a couple of them in the 2006 piece. Alan Johnson, who we just heard speak, did a wonderful analysis of them as well. Cockell also did an analysis of them again, sort of doubling on that work, really going through each and every single one of them, categorizing them, looking at the sorts of values that actually apply in these particular cases. And then again, for me, what wilderness is I think really important. I'm an ethicist who does not want to do metaphysics, but feels like he keeps having to do metaphysics. So this question, what is wilderness, is a really, really tough question. And I wanted to take just a moment here to talk about what wilderness is, especially on Mark Woods' account. Mark Woods has this great book, Rethinking Wilderness, where he goes through and looks at all of the critiques of the wilderness idea and says, you're all wrong, but you have a point, right? Like, no, like it's a lot of straw manning and so on and so forth, but like the sentiment is right. Like there are ways in which wilderness has been used problematically throughout history, right? But there are different ways in which we can rethink wilderness. And so he talks about wilderness as being untrammeled locations with the value-adding properties of natural, wild, and free. One of the things I want to make sure I clarify here, because this is something that plagues even the environmental literature, and I'll take any opportunity I can to make sure I get this out there. Untraveled does not mean untouched. It does not mean not stepped on. That is not what untraveled means. Travels are confinings. Travels are sort of controllings. So we can have a world in which we have wilderness and people live in it. The way in which they would engage with the natural world would just simply not be a way of confining it and making it sort of fit a particular model, right? Instead, what we maybe have is living in harmony with the land or something like that, right? You can still have wilderness and people too. Wilderness is not necessarily a place where there are no humans ever. But let's talk about Leave No Trace. Leave No Trace is a very, very, very simple and straightforward program that gives you 7 principles for engaging in outdoor activities, especially if you're going into parks and the like. They are all over the place. There is Leave No Trace or LNT branded gear and whatnot that you can buy. And the 7 principles are these. Plan ahead and prepare. Travel and camp on durable surfaces. Dispose of waste properly. Leave what you find. Minimize campfire impacts. Respect wildlife. And be considerate of other visitors. So that's LNT in a nutshell, and it comes from the Leave No Trace Center for Outdoor Ethics. So there's a lot to say about LNT, and certainly in outdoor recreation there have been a lot of arguments about LNT, about whether it is sufficient as an ethic. Right? It's very focused on particular areas, but you're the Leave No Trace Center for Outdoor Ethics. How much of an ethic is this really? So that's been a big critique here. Sometimes it's thought like, okay, like we can at least we can leverage the sort of ubiquitousness of LNT. And it's everywhere in order to jump off and do more programs that get a little more depth to it. But essentially, while LNT critics do note the good that these programs do, they find that as an ethic it's pretty poor. And if we take a look at the LNT principles here again, right, cool, 6 has the word respect in it. And we have be considerate in number 7. The rest don't really feel like an ethic. They might be really derived sorts of principles, but we might ask like, okay, plan ahead and prepare. Why? And then we start eventually maybe getting back to something that gives us an ethic or something that gives us a larger, wider sort of environmental consciousness. But LNT has been successful, so one of the core questions here is, all right, how might it actually apply? If we take these 7 principles and apply them to Mars, what do we get? This is at least my tentative sort of conclusion here. Minimize campfire impacts. Good luck making a campfire on Mars. Be my guest. There are many ways in which we can expand beyond that and think about, like, and this is the approach that Andre Stonehouse takes. It's like, okay, how can we go beyond? Well, minimize campfire impacts, so we were maybe thinking about, like, being more conscious of our fuel choices, right? There's a way to try to expand here, but as a principle, minimize campfire impacts doesn't really do much. As far as wildlife goes, to call microbes wildlife feels weird. I mean, we might say technically if it's wild in its life, it's wildlife, but if you went into the woods and came back to me and said you saw some wildlife, I said, what'd you see? And you said an oak tree, you would feel like you're misusing the word, right? That's not really what we mean. We mean something else. But when we're taking a look at plan ahead and prepare, yeah. You need to be prepared if you're going out on Mars. You will die. Travel and camp on durable surfaces. Good luck camping. Maybe with some technological breakthroughs we can have that. I think there's an extra sort of question about traveling here. There's a big critique, especially going back to Effort Abbey, about the building of roads into wilderness areas and the ways in which that carves them up, confines certain populations and whatnot, as well as humanizes the environment in a particular, not so good way. Dispose of our waste properly, right? There's this idea of packing out what you pack in, which is maybe related more to like energy conservation. Don't leave your waste around. Like, we're on Mars, we gotta reuse it. Leave what you find, because this is anti-extraction orientation and gets us at preserving the character of the Martian environment as well. And be considerate of others is the most general recommendation one can possibly have. But be considerate of other visitors and the like. Yeah, sure. So at the very least, as far as LNT is concerned, it seems like maybe because it is so basic, it could apply to our planetary parks. Right? We maybe need still a little bit more. We need to perhaps introduce in Other sorts of restrictions, right? LNT here is still very focused on recreation. And like if we have settlements on Mars, just assuming we do, I mean, get on out there and experience Mars, right? Like, see Mars, get to know Mars. It's a wonderful place, I think, even though it might kill you. Right, there's still something beautiful about that, right? That these sorts of wild places are sometimes valuable because of their otherness, their threat maybe that they even have to you. Right? If we think about a world like a Midwest without wolves in it, right? The character of that environment has changed because that threat's gone. So I'm out of time, but I think there are some other things to look at here too. We do have LNT, but there are also these right to roam sorts of structures that we see in Scotland and in the Scandinavian countries that could also maybe apply to thinking about the land more generally, especially the sort of in between.